Thank you everyone for joining. And I was prompted by Stephen's presentation last week when he shared that what are the government's main goals, and one was AI, the other one was green, and that prompted my thinking about recent event I went to, and I heard Professor Gopal a bit different perspective from what we hear every day, which is always hype, 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 and AI, and it's quite sexy word, and it's quite interesting, and especially recent events with ChatGPT or other OpenAI, etc. And I wanted to bring Professor Gopal in, who will explain a little bit more about himself, but he is, in short, one of the first people in computer science and AI in the UK, or when AI became quite popular, or rather started becoming popular. And also he is advising UK government on responsible AI. His view was quite interesting to point out in terms of clashing speed of AI growth with actual renewable energy growth. And these two are not really matching. And therefore, someone has to step in and really explain that to likes of yourselves in the call who are investing in these parts. And you should also see something that is not so much spoken about openly. So without further ado, Professor Gopal, mic is on you.
Thanks, Mirana. And good to meet you all. As Mirana said, and thanks, Mark, for this slot on this call. So just to pick up on that, so I'm a professor of AI at the University of Southampton. I'm also the director of the UKRI Trustworthy Autonomous Systems Hub, which is a big program, a £30 million program that's looking at all sorts of AI and AI-based systems, autonomous systems of all kinds. And I also recently won a grant to run a flagship AI program of the UK called Responsible AI UK, which is a £31 million program. And that's also, again, focusing a bit more on responsibility and trust in AI-based systems in sectors like healthcare, transport, energy, the digital system, defense, security, etc. My background is really AI in defense security, starting with defense security and disaster response, and then moving on to energy management, which where I did a lot of work that I've now transposed to my startup, Empathy Limited, which is looking at building some of the new core technologies for smarter and climate friendly and systems. So looking at ensuring that we mitigate our carbon emissions in a reliable, very precise way, and ensure that our energy systems are secure. So the discussion we had in London a couple of months ago now was all about the impact of AI on society, and many people are worried about what's coming up next. There's been a huge hype around AI with ChatGPT coming up last year, and the conversation has just grown from there in terms of what's the next thing, what's the next big thing with LLMs, with GPT type systems, and what's better than one GPT? Well, 100 GPTs, which is what OpenAI was talking about a couple of weeks ago. But we rarely think about the impact of these algorithms and systems on the real world, and whether they actually add any value to the economy in any way. So what's the cost? What's the benefit of these systems? And one part of the cost of these systems is the energy cost. And Mark Andreessen recently talked about this. 90% of your AI costs will be the energy cost. AI requires lots of compute, depends on the kind of AI that you deploy, obviously. LLMs, which drive ChatGPT, take a lot of energy to train themselves up. So about 1,000 megawatt hours, that's 100,000 homes, I think, in the UK, would be the amount of electricity that is used by GPT to just train up. And then you have a lot of energy used to do the inference. So every time you type a query to GPT, you're consuming about, I think, an LED light worth of turn on for a day worth of energy. And there are questions around whether GPT is actually itself sustainable. Can they keep doing that? And which is potentially one of the reasons why we had the issues at OpenAI a couple of weeks ago. where there may be divergences on the cost of these systems and whether they can scale. The latest report from Air Street Capital that talks about the state of AI mentions some of these innovations that OpenAI is trying to bring about. So increasing the number of tokens that they look at, improving the compute that they have, and pointing at the fact that many of these solutions that they have do not actually are not big innovations. They're not huge changes in terms of the models or the modeling techniques. They are quite incremental. And Sam Altman a few months ago also said that they sort of plateaued in terms of the technology itself, and it's all about compute power. Having more of these chips is better, which is why Microsoft jumped in, committed a number of a huge investment to buy more NVIDIA chips. Similarly, we've seen at Inflation.ai this big investment, 1.8 billion, going into buying 20,000 NVIDIA chips. The UK government has clued up on this. Is also investing 500 million pounds in the latest autumn budget to buy compute power to create these new data centers. So everyone's racing to get more and more compute. So therefore, what's going to happen next with this technology? Well, what I think is starting to happen is that everyone is competing to build the best LLM, and whoever's got the compute is going to have potentially the cleverest LLM, and they're going to incur huge costs, energy costs, but they're not going to be able to charge much to their users. The revenue streams are quite limited, and we'll see a race to the bottom in terms of pricing when it comes to charging for LLM and GPT-based services. Those who are going to look to gain are the NVIDIA types. For a while, we'll see NVIDIA probably win that game in terms of providing that compute power, but others are cluing up to that, and the Intels and AMDs and others. And that's where you see huge growth in terms of sales and revenue. But behind all of that sits the impact, the energy impact, obviously. And as I mentioned, 1,000 megawatt hours of electricity for trading up a GPT. It's a huge cost that is potentially spread across many countries. So they are going to look to build data centers, and data centers already account for more energy consumption than the construction and the maritime sector combined right now. And the number of projects, renewable energy projects coming online to serve our growing energy demands are not good enough, right, to try and mitigate our carbon emissions. And most of these projects are now being channeled to deliver energy to these data centers. So we need to be mindful about the carbon impact, so sort of marginal carbon impact of these AI-based systems. And it's not like sort of trying to these AI systems obviously add value to the economy. They are looking to grow, I think 1.22% growth, extra growth to the world GDP in years to come. So it's a huge value to be added to the economy. But where does this value sit is a big question. So who is looking to get most of it across the world? We're not sure who's going to benefit. Are these the countries where we're going to build all these big renewable energy projects are going to charge for this electricity to drive these data centers? Or these the countries where we're going to see lots of new AI type services, improving government services, improving telecoms, improving our energy systems themselves. So it's not clear how these new AI-based systems are going to create disparities across the world when it comes to harnessing some of this value that's coming out of it. And then there are questions about what's next. Beyond LLMs, we know about LLMs, we know a bit about drones, we know a bit about autonomous vehicles on the roads. What's coming next? From where I sit, looking at these research programs across the UK, across the US, the next big thing to build this sentient AI is this notion of causality. We still build systems that are built like the LLMs, are built to generate the next word based on correlations. So they build on lots of data sets, statistics, but don't quite actually understand the causes and effects of things in these systems. So where we see the world moving next to build this sort of sentient AI, or on the road to sentient AI, if we ever get there, is embedding this notion of causality in AI. So causal AI is the next big thing with it. And that means gathering data across multiple systems, across AI supply chains, in ways that would allow us to infer causality between events. And we see this as the sort of fundamental component that would allow machine-to-machine transactions across multiple markets, multiple systems. So that's where I think there's huge opportunity to sort of build more reliable systems. So where you actually build systems that know what's going to happen next, or what are the alternative options, the impact of different options, rather than just guessing things based on correlations, and building them to be more resilient and more adaptive to any emerging sort of changes in the climate, changes in the politics, as we've just discussed. So things that would be more reactive to what happens on a socioeconomic level. So that's where sort of LLMs, AI, and are moving to, I think. But yeah, I'm happy to hear more views and questions from the audience.
Well, I guess, and thank you, Gopal. Then there are a few others that I invited to join that discussion, although you set the stage really, really well as I'll call you a practical academic. Mm-hmm. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's right.
So, Patricia and Byron, and hold your question out if you could. Patricia, are you there?
Well, wait, Patricia, I just wanted to point out that Stuart Dodd is also here in the call. I mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. Hi, Stuart. Nice to meet you. I don't see Patricia. I'll have to look in, but Byron, I was trying to get the East and West Coast of the U.S. involved. Maybe you want to add on to what Gopal put forward here? How you see the world?
Yeah,
when you and I met in 2016, AI was one of your themes, and then there was actually a statement like, oh, we're over AI, and now AI is back in a different incarnation. But go ahead.
Yeah. I thought Gopal's summary was really good, and a pretty pragmatic view of the world. I've been an AI investor. Actually, my last company that was acquired was doing infrastructure AI, like back in 2012, and I spent a lot of time in the first wave of AI, focused on applied AI systems that were rolled out of universities. So some of those you may know of, like in the UK, are like Tractable. Early investors there. I think the summary, I try to view things. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess just a few additional comments there. The LLMs in general, as a pre-seed, seed, deep tech investor, I've stayed away from them. Obviously, they're large capex. You can index that probably, as was mentioned, with investing in public semi companies like NVIDIA. There's a lot of it's a very dark red ocean. There's a lot of companies that are well financed that are kind of all chasing the same targets, and we're already starting to see like downward pricing pressure. I think also, as a pragmatic investor, I think it's pretty well known. There were a lot of companies, I think, trying to run after LLM wrappers, taking OpenAI, building vertical apps out of it. Most of those are features. So how we're viewing the world is the immediate winners of like OpenAI, GPT themes are companies with established customer base. So if they're startups, they're probably more in the growth stage. A great example of that is like Case Text, right? They had a lot of law firms as customers. They were like the LexisNexis search. They were early adopters of ChatGPT. They 3-4x their sales pipe really quickly when they realized that they could create big efficiencies inside of law firms, and they were required for a large amount of basically a larger tuck-in acquisition. So there's a lot of those. We've stayed clear of anything that's consumer enterprise, or consumer, unless you saw the typical barriers of like social network, you know, brand type defensibility. Microsoft is cloning companies vertically. So those are pretty dangerous places to live on AI. Short term, we see a lot of opportunities for tuck-in acquisitions around things like, you know, inference compression on edge compute. There's a lot of opportunities in the peripherals around energy, whether that's transistor up, if you're doing stuff and trying to get the world back on track from Moore's Law. I think there's some really interesting tuck-in acquisitions there. And I would just reemphasize Gopal's point. I spent a lot of time with the big tech energy teams. I'm an active energy investor. They have a lot of net zero initiatives coupled with massively expanding compute. So if you're like investors in areas like nuclear, you know, they're looking at that world very, very differently over the last 2 years, and especially the last 6 to 8 months. And I think you'll see the EU kind of about facing out some policies, I think, which is going to be really good for the world and interesting. And if you're doing energy, decentralized microgrid stuff, there's some really interesting, if you're a project investor, there's some really great opportunities there as well, as they continue to look for green electrons to come into their service centers and hit these compliance regulations that keep getting added to their teams. And then short term, long term LLM, I'm more interested right now. I think LLMs are in a state of being able to replicate analysis of humans, which is really exciting. I'm really excited to see what the academics and the amazing minds and at our top companies R&D, when they start solving ideas like creativity and being able to find white space. I think that's going to be really, truly amazing. Maybe that's the promise of quantum computing or next generation compute, but to me, that's probably the next big jump. Otherwise, it's just a lot of short-term optimization around things like cost. Latency is still a big problem if you're doing anything real time. Solving problems like if you're doing autonomy in low connectivity environments, these are very difficult practical AI problems. And then finding like a great business with great unit economics. Right now, it's pretty expensive.
So maybe Patricia will join us soon, but maybe in the meantime, any questions from the UK practical academic perspective and the Palo Alto Valley perspectives?
Can I just mention something that has come up a couple of times when it comes to the adoption of AI technologies? You may have seen in the last couple of weeks that Microsoft banned its employees from using GPT. And companies in the UK, Faculty AI, is trying to test out how AI could be used in government services. But they still don't trust it enough to do the job of a human, to replace humans at certain tasks. That question of trust, which I study as part of my work at universities and the big programs I mentioned, is a key one that has a number of dimensions to it. The regulatory environment that you're working in, how will AI be regulated, is a big question right now for many governments. And so far, we've only seen high-level principles being defined. And that's creating a lot of uncertainty for startups, for established companies, as to what is the AI that can actually deploy in the healthcare sector, for example, to do lung cancer diagnosis or other kinds of patient-facing activities or robotic surgeon type applications. So regulatory environment is not clear. The kind of tools and principles to build those technologies into the real world are not well defined. So these sorts of technologies, from my research, tell me that we need a different approach to building and deploying these systems. They do require a completely different way of thinking beyond the purely engineering view of the world. They need to bring in multidisciplinary teams to fully understand the impact and the implications for the humans that are involved, both directly working with the AI, but all those who will be impacted by the AI. And that's where the government tries to characterize this as explainability, interpretability of these AI-based systems, but it's not just that. These are undefined words for industry in many cases. So this is a huge area where if we can address some of these, we can unlock the value that AI can bring in certain applications. Right now, there's a reluctance to deploy some of these technologies, and that could impact some investments going forward. The second thing I wanted to bring up, if I can, Mark, is the what Byron mentioned in terms of the big tech companies building all these renewable energy projects across the world. Google, Microsoft, all claiming to have a zero carbon energy production. But what they don't tell us is how they're actually tracking the energy that they use. And as we see AI being deployed everywhere in the world, and we see carbon emissions being taxed and here and there, companies will want to report as part of their ESG commitments, where the impact of the AI that they're building. And not many people think about that. If you're building a service that builds on top of GPT that produces tons of carbon, and you're not accounting for that in your scope 2, scope 3 emissions, that's going to be a huge issue, reputational issue, but also potentially a regulatory issue further down the line. So tracking technology for these sorts of energy intensive applications is not there yet, even for the Apples and the Googles of this world. And that's one of the problems that I'm addressing in one of my projects.
Yeah, I mean, I got a few comments there, but I think Gopal probably add more depth to this. On the energy tracking, there are a lot of startups that are working on that, and there are internal systems that are being built at big tech to try to do that. The problem, as is you get into like regional grids. So, for instance, tracking what electrons are coming from where inside of China isn't really easy, but these companies still have deployments inside the region, right? So it's a varying problem, and it's not an easy problem. A lot of the stuff that's been done to date has been, frankly, pretty rudimentary. But there are a lot of folks working on that. I guess the other points that you had a lot in your first point, but from the restrictions on AI, I have a lot of dual use companies, defense. And I think one of the big problems is, and actually it's a great opportunity for startups, is just the training data for LLMs and like what's being trained on, what isn't, what's fair PII to train on, what isn't. And being able to characterize that across large, diverse systems is a really, really tough problem. And that's where a lot of this is coming from. It's just, hey, there's a prompt where, someone might be taking a report, an internal report inside my company and putting it inside a ChatGPT to write it better. That's a big security risk. And so I think people will figure that out. And, some people would argue that's what's going to drive a lot of open source LLMs and people doing more in cloud stuff inside of their own cloud. But, we'll see what happens. But Gopal, comment.
And Byron, what time do you arrive tomorrow?
Out. I figured that out. I'm almost done. It'll be like 10 a.m. It looks like.
All right, good. Because we'll continue these discussions. I know that Patricia's joined. I don't know if she can speak at the moment. Nick Davido, who's got an AI fund as well. But now we have 3 questions from Adam, Anna, and Sanjeev. So in 361 style, I feel like we need to take a question, but Adam, you already asked one. Can we let Anna go first, and then we'll go back and forth. We'll introduce new speakers.
Definitely. Good.
Hold your powder.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both for sharing this wonderful insights. My question is, back in April, Elon Musk and 2 other people warned about potential high risk to the humanity in the development of the AI applications and all these technologies, is that being taken into consideration? And do we know specifically what that risk is to the humanity? And it sounds like it's a tremendous risk that they were pointing to.
Is that the Gopal?
Yeah, I can take that one. I I get asked that question very often, and there seems to be a divide in the AI camp right now. So we have the sort of extreme, existential threat crowd, like the Musk and Hinton and Benjo and others, and then we have another crowd that says, well, it's not going to happen anytime soon, and we have more urgent risks to address or more urgent harms to address right now with AI. And I sit as an expert here. So I go to these AI conferences. I see the latest developments in AI, and I've seen the technology that ChatGPT uses. There's a nice tutorial in the Guardian newspaper that explains, step by step how a large language model works. A large language model works by using all sorts of models of language and words and correlations and even now images to predict the next word. That's all it does. It doesn't have an understanding of who you are, what you do, and what you want. It is trying to predict the next word based on correlations. They're still struggling to incorporate feedback when things go wrong. They're still struggling with very, very basic things, and they get very excited when they talk about solving maths problems. For me, the holy grail of AI obviously is to invent sort of super intelligence. One day we'll get there. Will that happen before we have a climate disaster? I don't think so. Right. So I think the closer existential risk is the climate risk. And as we grow the energy consumption of AI, we're going to hit that one first before we hit the other one. So if I look at it in this way, then I'm not too worried about existential threats of AI right now. I don't see it being built within the next 5-10 years. ChatGPT gives the impression that it is super clever, but it is not that super clever as it's claimed to be. It does look like it's understanding you, but it clearly doesn't. And we have many experts who will back me up on this. So, but on the climate risk, I think we have equally a similar number of experts who will say this is likely to happen very soon. And the geopolitics of climate change are quite serious, right? So we need to try and deal with that sooner than later. I hope that.
Fair enough. But maybe just keeping it balanced, Patricia or Nick, if you've heard these themes, if you can introduce yourselves and how you're coming at AI investing, and then we'll get to you, Sanjeev.
Hi, everyone. Mark, thank you for inviting. My name is Nick Davidoff. I run, together with my wife, we run Davidoff's VC, which is an early stage fund investing in repeat founders doing AI startups. We've been doing this since 2014. We're currently investors in about 80 companies. Some of them are getting pretty big. Perplexity just raised at 500 mil. We're usually one of the first investors to back them. We are backed ourselves by a community of engineers, 119 of them, and they're employed with pretty much every large AI corporation in existence. Like we have 3 employees from OpenAI and a few from Google Brain, NVIDIA, Tesla, and everything. So we believe it's a really, really good vintage to be building. We are currently not even approaching the chasm between the early adopters and the massive adoption. We're still in the early phases, but what's interesting is the speed of this adoption is incredible, and we can say that would probably reach the chasm in about a year. So a bunch of unicorns that raised crazy valuations will fail. And people will again say that LLMs are overhyped, but at the same time, large corporations will begin their adoption cycles, and in 3-4 years will generate trillions of dollars of additional value out of utilizing this. Commenting on AI safety, I'd say that I'm honestly more concerned about other risks connected with AI. So I think there are three types of risks. So the first type is the doom risk type of risk. Basically, it becomes super intelligent, conscious, for some unknown reason, decides that humanity is not great and destroys us in one way or another. Multiple scenarios have been explored by Hollywood. I don't really believe that is feasible. Two other risks are more real. The first risk is people using AI for the bad. Some of our portfolio companies are already capable of generating lifelike videos of people saying stuff that they never said. I can already imagine my mom getting a video call, like a FaceTime call, from something that looks like my number, with me asking her to, wire $1,000 because I got in trouble or something like this. That is a big problem, and that is really, really hard to regulate, and it's really, really hard to put a lid on it. And then the third type of risk is, I think, even more scary. It's the economical risk. So AI is a tool that allows certain countries, certain institutions, certain companies to get an upper hand in the economic rivalry. It's not about displacing humans, but it's from jobs, but it's more about displacing companies that are lagging behind in adopting this technology with all of their workforce, or sometimes even displacing countries from areas of their usual economic work. So our society is not structurally prepared to adopt AI, and the speed of adoption is incredible. To this point, we only have 1% of all industrial operations automated by robots. We've had robots for 50 years. Robots are hard to distribute. Robots are hard to sell. Like, you need to physically manufacture them, implement them, program them. ChatGPT got to 100 million users in 2.5 months. That is incredible. So I think this is the biggest risk. We are now 11 months into ChatGPT craziness, and I haven't seen a single initiative on reforming the education system, because I believe this is crucial for us as humanity to enjoy the benefits of AI without actually paying the huge price for it, because we are just not ready. Our society, our educational system still works on preparing humans on how to make things and how to do stuff, and we should be moving towards what to do and why to do it. So this is
No, it's good.
sorry.
No, that was, I mean, there's so many discussion threads here. So Patricia, do you want to chime in, or I'm going to let Sanjeev ask a question? I think that's a cue for you, Sanjeev. Go ahead.
All right, quick introduction from my side. I'm an AI researcher, scientist turned entrepreneur turned investor now. So I'm an emerging manager now. And what I'm trying to do is and this is more, I know it's a comment, but it'll become a question soon. What I'm trying to do is to use AI and its powers to make investors, bring transparency to investors, starting with the pension funds and endowments and such, all the way down into the GPs and into the companies itself. So the question I had to Dr. Gopal is, I loved what you said about the causality piece being the next thing, because I do understand that, I do agree with you that everything that's out there in terms of LLMs are really just association. They're just predicting the next keyword, like your Google keyboard might do on your phone. How far do you think that's? I know it's on the path to super intelligence or whatever, but in general, how far are we along in terms of getting to the point where causality is really an important solution, or there's viable solutions out there?
There are a couple of companies, including my own, working on causal AI technologies. A good one is the Causal Lens, that's doing causal AI for financial services, understanding the impact of certain trading or investment decisions in companies. Causal AI is not a new idea, but has been around for a long time. The problem with that, with deploying it out in the real world, has been the access to data. The reason LLMs and image recognition, pattern recognition, drug discovery, and all sorts work is because data has been collected in the right way. They've collected billions of images, millions of images of different kinds, and they can train algorithms on it. When it comes to causal AI, what's missing usually is the connection between data points, the connection between decisions and data. And very few people have collected data in that form across systems of systems, across the web, etc. Across the web, there is a standard for the web called the W3C provenance standard that helps you track data across the web, but no one really uses it effectively. So tracking this data in the right way, tracking it at the right precision, tracking the elements that generate this data set has been missing. And that's one of the things I'm working on is to build that and automate the collection of this data to infer causality on the fly, let machines infer causality. Right now, even with causal lens, it's still humans who build causal graph. Most causal AI systems are human driven. So the real big challenge, once we get over the idea get through the idea of automated causal AI or causal graph discovery, then causal AI will be a reality, and it will get there very, very quickly, because we have lots of research that has been done on hypothetical scenarios that use causal AI. And once we get to causal AI, then systems can reason for themselves, and that's a big leap for me. It's the next big leap. It's where machines become truly intelligent when they are offered multiple options. They can automate decisions reliably. They can explain their decisions. Right now, LLMs can't explain the decisions. No deep learning system can explain its decisions. Whatever explainability tools you show me, I'll tell you why it is not actually explaining its decision. It's just showing you features that you think might be relevant to the outcome. So that's where I think causal AI is going to have a big impact, and that's going to cut across all sectors.
Yeah, thank you. I'll wait for my turn for next question, but I have other questions as well.
You might throw them in the chat too.
Perfect.
Adam's back.
My question is for Gopal. You had mentioned early on trust, that the governments were reluctant or that they had issues of trust. What do you mean by that exactly? The information that is inputted and where that information goes and the security of that information?
Yeah, so to trust, and I mean trust in a number of ways. So for people to adopt the system, for companies to adopt the system, they need to be able to trust that it is giving them the right recommendations, or it is making decisions for them in the right way. So there's a question of reliability, right? Do I trust it to do the thing that I want it to? Then you have a trust of who owns that system. So are you giving away data that someone else will be using to do something for themselves and to exploit you? Do you trust them to use your data effectively? Do you trust the system to have the right impact on your organization? Because there are long-term impacts that come with machines that learn over time, that learn and adapt over time, and take away potentially skills from your team. So if you look at an airplane now, a pilot gets on a plane and flies it for 7 minutes out of 12 hours, mainly around the landing or takeoff time. Most of the time, it's an AI-based system. Will that pilot be able to react quickly enough when things go wrong on that plane? Because so many things are taken over by AI. So do you trust that system? Yes, we trust the planes because they've been working on accident cases and all sorts of issues for a very long time. And when we saw the Boeing 737 MAX crash, that was a failure of skills and not skills, so sort of reliability testing and fault tree evaluation. So we are building systems that are becoming more fragile in that sense, right? So where we're giving a lot of autonomy to machines and losing all these skills. So that's another big trust issue for me, where we start integrating these machines alongside humans in more complex, long-running continual learning system.
Thank you.
And we can unpack that. I've got 2 large research programs dealing with this problem of trust. So happy to invite you to come and see what we talk.
Well, you had mentioned also tracking the data points.
Yeah.
And that's where I would think that's part of the trust issue.
Indeed, it's tracking the provenance of the data that you use. So when you're doing a query on GPT, it doesn't tell you, or maybe it's starting to tell you now, where it's got its data from, or how it's reasoned about stuff. So there's another LLM, Perplexity AI, does something like that. It explains to you where it's got its data from, and that helps you trust its recommendations better. It will also tell you when it cannot give you a reliable answer. And GPT also does that to some extent. So that's part of providing you with, the provenance helps you attribute credibility to the data set.
Sure. Stephen?
A quick question for you on if you were going to advise any government to get ready for AI, what are the couple things you would tell them they need to be thinking about right now?
The big one is upskilling the whole team, the whole workforce, making sure that they have people clued up about AI in procurement, clued about AI in terms of the legalities of AI, equipping all the regulators with the skills and toolkits that will help them do that auditing themselves. What I've seen in the UK, for example, gives me a lot of worry. Ofcom is not planning to build its own AI team, for example, to evaluate AI-based systems. It is planning to offload that to someone else. So there's huge opportunity out there for professional services companies, the Deloitte and PwC and others, who can do that auditing, the AI auditing. But governments need to be clued up. We've seen a failure of this in the defense sector in the UK, where procurement is not clued up about AI capabilities. What is it that they can reliably build into their ecosystem of services? So skills is a big one. Regulatory certainty for industry to grow that, to really harness that AI opportunity. They are failing to do that in the UK right now. They need to get their act together very quickly. Otherwise, industry will move somewhere else where they can deploy and build their AI technologies as quickly as they can.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments?
But it's the same for Nick and Byron. What would you advise companies to be doing right now when it comes to thinking about how do you get AI into your organization and how do you do it the right way?
I can jump in on this. So there's a good framework I think we can all use. First, we need to figure out that there are multiple ways we can automate operations in companies. And it all begins with being able to produce data to make decisions possible. So we can all use, RPA tools to do some mundane tasks. But if we really want to go towards ideally a fully autonomous enterprise, we need to begin with a framework, with environment that would allow us to create a digital twin. It's a little bit easier with manufacturing businesses that already are going towards digital twins. But if we're talking about a service company or a product company, sometimes decisions are made in ridiculous ways, like a product manager meets a developer at like in the kitchen, and they talk about something, and then they add some task into a sprint, and nobody has documented why that happened, like what was the data they based the decision on. So if we start at least doing everything like this in medium that is documentable, that is the first way. And then we can think of this in the following ways. First, autonomous agents based on large language models are pretty good in doing basic operations like being a support agent or cold calling, but then we need to figure out how to manage this. Then we need to implement a solution. There are multiple companies doing what's called Markov decision process graphs. This basically is automating a manager with managerial decisions. Combining this is a good way to basically automate a function. And when we think of it, it's like we can automate a function in the business. What do we do with this knowledge? I suggest using thinking from first principles. Basically, we can start thinking about business functions in the way that we've never been able before. For example, support. What really is support for a product company? Support is loyalty. Support is part of user experience. Why is a support function separate from user experience? Mostly because operationally it's very different to manage. It's like very hard to manage 100 support personnel when you are an UX designer. You're not fit for that. But now, if it's not 100 support personnel, if it's maybe 3 people managing a bunch of bots, you can pretty much implement this into a user experience process to make sure that these functions are always talking to each other. The way we did it in our fund, we looked at our company functions. Basically, we drive returns for our investors, and we include them in the venture capital process because this like the community approach. So we're like, how do we automate everything to streamline this as a single process? And then we just built a GPT-4 based tool that allows to take all of the unstructured data that our community members send us, like all of the decks, all of the materials, websites, mentions of companies. We suck them and we augment them by data found online through web search. We analyze the decks automatically, and then our tool populates all of the fields in the CRM, allowing us to work with this as a quantitative data to sort it and compare to historic versions of it. And then each time we get a portfolio update from a portfolio company, we read it with a GPT-4 based tool. It basically comes up with ideas how we can be helpful to that company. And then it comes up with ideas of which of our LPs can be the most helpful. So then it connects them through email. And if they are helpful, it gives them a share of carried interest based on deal by deal basis. So this is just an example of a process we've done that was very, very hard to do manually, would require a lot of people. We've done something similar to this in our very first firm, and that required us to have 18 employees full time. But we're now 2 partners. So I think this is to sum it up, thinking from first principles of like, what is the essence of a certain process? What are the fundamental building blocks of it? And how can we rearrange these building blocks using automation, RPA and AI tools to basically combine it in a more efficient way?
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
I guess I would just, I thought that was very comprehensive. I guess I would just add that I think you just look, I think you triage based on the priorities of the business. Most of the immediate AI opportunities that we've seen are around things like labor supply issues, obviously costs, but also things like safety enhancement, accuracy. I think you've got to do a lot of work in terms of, and I'm just speaking as I'm maybe not a startup, but a company that's going to basically use AI in our systems. And then I think it's really important that you run formal RFP processes, make sure that you understand what's there. That's like, it's a rapidly changing environment. Efficacy is a big deal. There's a lot of vaporware, and there's a lot of to your point about there's a lot of applications that don't make sense, particularly around LLM hallucinations, just basically the ability to do things precisely.
That word, Byron, hallucinations came up from Nisa earlier. I'm out of the loop.
That's just basic. Yeah, it's just basically the LLM is feeding back some bullshit. So based on the input, and it's speaking copy. So there's confidence levels that are applied in the response potentially, but it's still an issue. For instance, if you are automating a car dealership, you could see things like the AI actually make up a spec on a car based on a broader training set. So these are real issues if you're doing something that's like mission critical. And I think there's other things that people aren't talking enough about, which were mentioned, like security, like making sure, again, like you don't have a leak of PII or you end up in like a GDPR violation. The liabilities that come around AI systems. There's things like continuity of service, right? We've seen some of these AI systems go down if you're using a centralized server and it's not on-prem. Cost is a big issue. So you think you're cutting costs, but you're finding out like tokenization costs are pretty high. And then always any new tech, you worry about things like lock-in, but still some, there's still just it's an amazing opportunity to automate businesses. But you've definitely got to do your work.
And what about, earlier today we talked about elections. We've got big ones coming up. And what about the force of AI, you know, for good and for bad, the impact that it could have on this next election cycle? Anyone want
I can go on this. I'm sure lots of people will want to talk about this. It was the subject of a panel I was on last month, and we've seen the US and the National Cybersecurity Center push out some rules around uses of AI, and you've seen also the Facebook lawsuit in the US as well around using AI to influence people. I mean, clearly AI can be used in all sorts of technologies, including not Facebook directly, but to influence behaviors, to influence emotions, and do it on a very personalized level. AI can be abused at scale, so you can create thousands of bots to post lots of different things in real time, personalized to individual people to influence them to make certain decisions. So it's huge worry in the UK by looking at the biggest economies in the world. India, US, UK, Indonesia, going to elections in the next year or so, and all of these potentially being influenced by AI misuse. So people misusing them to create deepfakes. We had examples earlier of deepfakes. Of all sorts of things, so where you eventually get people to distrust any information source. The BBC and others are working hard on that sort of problem. It's not just the elections that's going to get affected. I think it's any sector is going to be affected. When you look at the sports sector, for example, where people are worried about their brands, organizations are worried about their brands, actors and the media industry. Where people can really be attacked randomly. We have a huge issue right now in the UK with deepfakes and revenge porn in the UK. And it's very difficult to regulate. You try to sort of regulate software globally. How can you regulate software development when all this AI is open source? So questions have come up in the last AI summit and AI fringe that I ran at the British Library on whether we should open source AI or not. Because if you're open sourcing AI, you give access to this technology to anyone, any adversary around the world. But at the same time, if you restrict access to it, you're restricting poorer economies from harnessing AI very early on to reduce their costs and to grow their economy. So big decisions here. I don't think you can restrict open source AI. But we should be starting to equip ourselves with countermeasures when it comes to these sorts of misuses of AI.
anyone else? Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi,
You're coming in. Your video is coming in a little weird, so I'm going to turn you off video.
That's fine. Just a quick question. I'm trying to take in the power issue when it comes to AI on top of the demands for electronic vehicles, cryptocurrency mining. How do the utility companies begin to get around planning for all this?
Good question. I'm talking to a Japanese company about exactly this, as they see lots of data centers coming onto their grid, and pulling in all that power that they're trying at the same time to decarbonize their infrastructure, decarbonize their energy production. But at the same time, there's a huge demand from data centers to store data, to run AI algorithms. And they're struggling. And in the UK, for example, you cannot now connect any new solar power source to the network. So any solar, it's impossible to get a permit to connect a solar farm to the network in the southeast. And that's because the network is already overloaded. So they didn't plan ahead for a huge surge in energy demand or energy production, because you need to balance demand and supply in energy grids. So it's not just about supplying, putting in more solar farms and wind farms. You need to be able to accommodate that onto your network, and then you need to have the users who are the right users to use that energy. So the challenge they have is to predict where, or to find out where they should be deploying these data centers, where they will not overload the network, where they should be deploying the the energy production systems, so solar, wind, hydro, etc., where they will not overload the network, or what reinforcements they need to do on the network. They can use AI to optimize the network. Lots of smart grid AI-powered technologies you can build in. But what I've been working on the last 10, 15 years, I've been lots of digital twins. I think Nick mentioned digital twins earlier, building digital twins to predict where the next big demand will be, but also predict the impact of additions onto the network. Because energy demand will change over time, and we need to be able to accommodate those changes as different kinds of demands come onto the network. So digital twins to help them predict things better, to help them optimize in real time, better tools to optimize against a changing climate, so weatherproof type systems. So they are starting to build these tools. It's very early days. They are very slow adopters of technology, and the worry I have is that we soon see blackouts in the UK, for example, because the network has not been reinforced in the last 10, 15 years to the level that it needs to be. So huge challenges for utilities at the moment. And they've, I think, maxed out on extracting value from their distribution and transmission networks. But yeah, we can go into
that's sort of where this whole discussion came from, right? So Paul, how are you? You have a question?
Great. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, Gopal, I just wanted to ask a question just back to what you just said on the power question. Is there like a demand response aspect of some of these AI data centers that you can, put them in line with the actual production of power at certain times? Effectively run them when when there's more power available on the network versus not. Like that's, I have some experience in the Bitcoin mining space, and that is a big play with, at least in the US, they have these centers that their power purchase agreements, basically they are required to turn off on certain days, demand days, and they provide a certain base load that you can allow, you can provide demand in certain or production in certain areas at an economic level, but then also you can turn them off on the fly. Doesn't work quite the same way, but is there maybe like a scheduling issue or a scheduling process that they can have for AI, or is it everything on the fly, real time requirements for AI applications?
So AI, thanks, Paul. Yeah, good question. AI applications are ripe for demand response because there's, for example, a training phase that you can schedule at the time of the day when you do have that free energy from solar or wind. And that allows you to mitigate your carbon emissions at the same time, not overload the system. The challenge that they have right now is actually onboarding new projects onto the network. So because they don't know where it is possible to connect new energy sources to the network. So demand response can help, yes, but only if you have enough energy production systems on the network in the first place. And if you don't have that, then you struggle to build in any new data centers. That's what utilities are struggling with. They have huge opportunities. They could have huge customers in their networks, but they can't onboard them because they can't build in enough solar and wind farms. To build these in, they either need to reinforce the network, right, or place these solar farms in parts of the network where it is not overloaded yet, and co-locate some of these data centers as well there, so it doesn't affect the rest of the network. To do that at the speed at which data center growth is going is nearly impossible because of all the barriers to building these PPAs in the right way, to building these projects, get planning permission for these large farms. It takes 2 years. From what I have a team that's working on this, in Colombia and in Japan. To get some of these EIAs done, to get these projects, is very hard. It takes a long time, but the reward is big at the end. Cool. Any AI that can be used to speed that up would be great, and we're working on some of these tools. So if you can get the rate of at which solar wind projects are coming online to a level that matches the growth in data centers, then you can potentially get, you balance that carbon, or reduce that carbon footprint that they will bring in, and help the network operators. So that's one area that needs to be worked on. But definitely in terms of making data centers more intelligent, optimize when and where they run the AI. So you may want to run an AI training algorithm in Colombia, where you have lots of solar at certain times of the day, rather than run it in the UK or in the US when the weather is changing all the time. So things like that you might need to think about if you're just worried about the cost of running or training the AI.
Yeah, I just real quick comment on that too. From what I've seen from is the duck curve and the continuity of service requirements for most of the centers that are coming up is that it's usually either a type of energy source that is predictable, whether that's battery storage with renewables. So there's a lot of emphasis right now on storage near these service centers, or like tapping geothermal, et cetera. But it's a very, very difficult problem, and it's being addressed. I think a lot of these folks now are viewing things from transistor level up, whether that's better power efficiency, power performance efficiencies in semiconductor process nodes, all the way to finding unique opportunities to source green electrons like reliably, which is very difficult. So and then that's all heightened by the dramatic expansion of EVs and the electrification of infrastructure, heating, third world economies coming up. I mean, our grid is under a pretty massive demand. Yeah.
Can I just ask everyone to think about, particularly Gopal, Byron, and others, Nick, just imagine as we leave this deep dive, it's really not a deep dive, it's like a scratch the surface discussion. What would you like to do if you had a blank sheet of paper and we could all collaborate on an event to bring the best of minds and then think of how to structure it? We like to do panels and then breakouts and then debrief, and then panels and breakouts and debrief, and where we have action points. We're sort of doing that in the healthcare sector in Singapore next week with Armin Sarkisian. It's going to be a really fascinating 4 days. But it just seems like you're all in your circles. Part of what we do is like to interconnect everyone, and it feels like this is the, we've been talking about, as you said, since, or I guess it was Nick, it was like 11 months ago. For me, I think it was 10. We've started to really focus on this in Naples, Florida, was the first time I really focused on it. But now we've learned a lot, and you've got all these issues from ethics to the 3 risks that you outlined, to the energy side, just to focus on, because maybe I'd like to think that our contribution is to connect people faster, better, to at least optimize the opportunities and address the risks, and frankly, make a lot of money together at the same time. Just maybe think about that, because you're new, Gopal, and Nick, you've been in and out of us. We're a community that's trying to bring out the top tier.
I think as a spectator, I would be really interested to have minds like Gopal, like focused AI funds like Nick's. Then you mix like startups, founders in different categories, computer vision, energy, infrastructure, people that are doing stuff in AI and maybe more unique areas like biomanufacturing, cybersecurity, and then couple that with some folks from big tech. That would be a pretty amazing kind of full spectrum as a spectator, and I think would be really valuable.
You're not going to be a spectator, I promise you.
Yeah. I think you'd get a nice admission fee on that one too.
For what it's worth, I'm happy to contribute or be a spectator in that as well. This is Sanjeev.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Well, trust me, as soon as you raise your hand, it'll be pulled. And anyone else?
Just because you asked me, I mean, I'd echo what Byron said, and I recently ran an event in London, as I mentioned, the AI Fringe, The questions that what was missing there for me is similar thing, panel, brief, debrief, and we also writing a white paper that will come out soon. The what was missing there was industry, SMEs and startups, so startups, big tech, but also policymakers who are having to deal. So getting them to sort of be on the same panel sometimes makes it quite exciting to see the divergence in terms of views and how deep they are thinking about certain things. So having those sort of things and enough time to network, because what you find is that you go to these events and you're attending panels, but you don't get time to talk to each other. I think enough time to talk to each other on the side and creating opportunities for that.
Yeah. Well, there are